Hello and welcome back to Battle Ready Minis. Today we're going to be painting some Second World War German infantry. Here's what the finished miniature will look like so you can decide whether or not to stick around. If you want to see how I painted this, then don't go anywhere. Today I'm going to be painting one of the miniatures from this set from Warlord Games, which is the late war German Grenadiers. And I'm going to be using mainly the paints from this Vallejo German Infantry uniform paint set. I thought it would be interesting to show how these kind of look in real life. And hopefully it comes with this little painting guide, which I found quite helpful when I started. So I'm going to be following this. The first thing we're going to do is base coat the miniature in black and then spray over with white, because we are going to be using some contrast paint and this is going to help with that. The first thing I've done is to use Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint to paint the face and the hands. This ended up being a little bit too dark on one side of the face due to the black undercoat showing through, so I did come back and touch up the face a little bit, which I'll go into in more detail when we get there. But generally, if you use white, this should be enough to get a decent finish. So now I'm going to take the first paint from our Vallejo kit. This is German Field Grey. This is the kind of default colour for the German uniforms, so for the jackets and the trousers. I'm going to thin this down slightly and then just paint it carefully onto the jackets and trousers. You don't want to get any on the cuffs or on the boots. Because we're using contrast paints for some of this, you want to leave all the white areas white unless you're painting them. One thing I struggled with slightly with this was the leather straps on the uniform, over the shoulders particularly. This isn't because it was difficult to miss them, but rather on the front of the miniature I found it quite difficult to see where they were. So I had to kind of guess slightly. There's quite a lot of folds and stuff on the front of this this model particularly, and it was a bit hard to differentiate what was strap and what was kind of collar and uniform and buttons and stuff. But obviously do your best. From a few feet away it's going to look fine. I did paint the helmet in this colour as well. That's not going to be the final colour for the helmet, but there's this sort of strap or band around the middle of the helmet. And so what I did was I kind of base coated it this colour, and then when I painted in the proper helmet colour, I missed out that band and that left it this kind of lighter colour. I felt that was easier than trying to just paint the band at the end. So if you find it helpful, you could do it that way as well. Now, after this had dried more or less, I went back in with the same colour and just touched up a few areas to try and get a nice even finish. So now I moved on to some contrast paint. I took Wildwood, so just any dark brown, and I used this for most of the strapping. So his straps on his back and over his shoulders, I filled in with this. And also his belt around his middle, as well as his canteen. I also use this to do the helmet strap under his chin. This is a little bit small and can be a little bit fiddly, but if you are careful and you go slowly, it should be fine. I also use this for the strap for his rifle. Again, this is quite small and fiddly, but because it's not pressed up against any other areas of the model, it's quite easy to paint quickly. And finally, I used the Wildwood for his boots as well. Not the cuffs though, just the boots. Switching back to the Vallejo set, next I used green grey just to do the cuffs at the bottom of his trousers. On the uniform painting guide, it says that you need to paint their gaiters with these. The model in front of me looks a little bit different from the drawing. It has these sort of like bunched up cuffs around the bottom of the trousers rather than the gaiters that are on the image that came with the paint set, but I figured it's not going to make too much difference. That's the only thing that we use green grey for. However, I do mix it in with some of the other colours just to do some highlights towards the end, which I will show you when we get there. Next, we're going to take German Camo Dark Green from the Vallejo set, and this is going to be used just for the helmet. Like I said, if you wanted to, you could just paint the helmet in this from the beginning. I decided to do a layer under it of the German Field Grey, just so I could miss that band out when I put the dark green in to give it the kind of stripe around. But again, if you're going for just pure speed, you could probably leave this out and save yourself a little bit of time, because you could just slap it on the helmet and not worry about being careful and missing the band like I'm doing here. Back to contrast then, and I'm going to take Gore Grunter Fur, which is just a slightly lighter brown, and I'm going to use this to do the wooden stock of the gun. I'm also going to use this to do the satchel, which is attached to the belt around the back of the soldier. I just sort of decided on the fly that I wanted to use the green-grey again for this other bag on his back, again just to avoid splashing it all in the same colour and making it look sort of like one big blob. So I used the green-grey, as I said, for this. Again, if you're going for pure speed, you could paint all this with the Gore Grunter Fur and not worry about it. It would still stand out from his body because it would be a lighter brown colour and it would still look pretty decent, I think. Finally, in terms of his belt, I used this Basilicanum Grey contrast paint to paint the ammo pouches, but you could use brown for these as well if you're going for pure speed. After this, we take a lead belcher. You can use any darkish silver, and I use this to paint the metallic areas on the rifle. I also used a slightly smaller brush to come back and paint in some of the belt buckles on his shoulder straps and on his back, and also on some of the little bags and satchels on his belt. This model also had some visible buttons down the front of his jacket, so I came back and painted these in too. Again, the belt buckles and the buttons and stuff are a lot of extra detail that you could miss out if you wanted to speed this process up. I decided to touch up the skin a bit, so I mixed Bugman's Glow with some lighter Flayed One's Flesh. This is just because I don't currently have a kind of mid-flesh tone. If you had something like Cadian flesh tone or another mid-flesh tone, you could just use that, but I had to mix it up. I went in and just lightened up where the kind of highlights would be, the cheekbones, the tip of the nose. I painted in sort of underneath the chin strap as well, just to make that strap stand out a little bit more. And I went back and I lightened this colour up a few times and just highlighted smaller and smaller bits. You can see here doing, again, the tip of the nose and the cheekbones in very, very lightest sort of colour. So there we go. I would say this is battle ready, but we're going to add a few more steps just for some optional extra detail. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wash the metallic areas only with a black wash. I'm going to use Nuln Oil, and the main metallic area on this miniature obviously is just the gun. And I'm going to just slather this all over the gun. Make sure not to use too much. You want enough to pull into the recesses to create shadow, but you don't want to swamp it and have it dry and kind of look kind of sticky and shiny. Next, we're going to use a brown wash. I use Agrax Earthshade for the whole rest of the miniature except for the face. Because I'd spent a little bit of time highlighting the face, I didn't want to just slather it in ink, and I'm going to do something different with that. But for the uniform, the boots, all the rest of him, you can just cover in this brown wash. I decided to use the Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint again on the face, rather than just the brown ink. I kind of thinned out a little bit of this. It's essentially sort of a flesh-coloured wash, so a similar effect to the ink. And now I went back in and I started doing some highlights. So this step is definitely optional. If you're going for just pure speed, you could stop after the ink wash if you wanted to do that step. But I'm showing you kind of how you might improve things once you'd got to that stage. So after doing a bit of highlighting with the original dark green camo colour of the helmet, I then mixed in a bit of green grey just to create a slightly lighter colour and apply this just at the top of the helmet and the very edges. You have to just think about where this would catch the light. A kind of easy, quick hack for this is just to highlight the very top areas of the miniatures and not the undersides. I did the same thing for the field jacket and the trousers as well. So I highlighted it with the original colour. In this case, it was the German Field Grey from that Vallejo set. And then I mixed in a little bit of green grey, highlighted just some raised areas. And then I went back in and lightened this up a couple more times and just kind of highlighting smaller and smaller points just to create that illusion, hopefully, of light kind of from the top down. And this is how he looked after a few stages of highlighting. I thought that the contrast paint on the face that I did kind of darkened it a little bit too much, so I decided to go back in again with the lighter flesh colour and just pick out a few details. I also tried to pick out the teeth because this miniature is sort of almost snarling. You can see his teeth. This didn't really show up very well in the end, so again, you could skip this step. The last thing I like to do on faces is to use very, very watered down red contrast paint. So it's very, very thin, almost transparent, and just go over the nose. I feel it gives a little bit of a kind of a flushed look. If you overdo it, they can kind of look like they're just very cold. And if you really overdo it, it might look a bit clownish with just a bright red nose. But I think a little bit adds a little bit of subtle colour in the face and can just bring it to life a little bit more. So this is in finished, battle ready with optional extra steps. The final thing to do is the base. I started by applying a layer of Zandri dust all over the base. I didn't want the white to show through at all because it would really spoil the effect. I used the technical Citadel paint Agrellan Earth next. You just slap this all over the base, the thicker the better really, and as it dries it cracks and it creates this dried earth texture effect. This is what it looks like after it's dried. After this I just put a little bit of PVA glue on some spots on the base and then applied some flock and sand from my miscellaneous mixed up pot that I have lying around. I added a few tufts and this is almost done. I also added some Typhus Corrosion, which is a Citadel technical paint. I usually use it to add kind of dirt and rust on vehicles. Maybe I'll do a video about that at some point, but I find it dries quite matte and it can add a nice little kind of mud effect on the base and also on the shoes, maybe some splashes on the gun. Finally, I painted the base rim. I used Corvus black for this, and this is the final model. So battle ready with extra steps. It took me about 45 minutes, a little bit over 45 minutes probably, but if you skip out all the layers of highlighting and all the little details that I added, maybe do a bit of a simpler base, you could definitely do this in probably half an hour. So a nice quick way to get a decent tabletop looking miniature. If you found this helpful, please give the video a like, consider subscribing or leaving a comment. It really would help me out. And I will see you in the next one.